inmate, and I run a prison. So I understand that a prison is a prison, but I also understand that there's a cost associated with running a prison. And for someone to tell me that I'm going to create this law that is mandatory, which is the difference between the current habitual offender bill and this 3 strikes legislation. Because one of the things that we would also argue is that the most powerful person in the state in the criminal justice field under this law becomes the district attorney, not the judges. Now think about this, keep this in the back of your mind. In California, under their 3 strikes law, they have what they call judicial discretion, where a judge can remove a strike for the purpose of fairness. So if that first strike was you were 17 and you had 3 ounces of weed, and you picked up a felony and you did 2 years, and then 20 or 30 years later, you know, you've got 2 strikes, and maybe one is serious and the third one, who knows? But a judge can actually go and remove a strike. In this bill, there is no judicial discretion. A judge cannot remove a strike. And the DA, as the charging authority, then becomes more powerful than the judge, because it's what he charges you with that depends on what happens when you get to a judge. Now, there's a study, again, in California that says, interestingly enough, 3 strikes is used for people of color 7 times that of white persons. 7 to 1. So you tell me that there's not going to be a racial disparity when we look at the district attorneys in this state who now have all of the power and the judges have no discretion. And let's face it, most of these judges, they know the people that come before them. Because unfortunately, they come before them before, and then sometimes they know their families, sometimes they understand their situations. So what reads as something terrible on paper often is not what it reads. But what happens under this legislation is you take away that judicial discretion. So keep that in the back of your mind. As we move on, we talk about things like mandatory post-release supervision. And again, all of these things have a cost, by the way, so we'll get to that, and that's really Tatum's area of expertise. But one of the things that really struck me about the whole issue of mandatory post-release supervision, and again, from someone who's worked with parole and probation for 30, 40 years, one, parole officers are not equipped. They're not equipped to do what should happen on post-release supervision. They know how to revoke you. They know how to make sure you're peeing in the cup. They know how to take that call when you had an argument with your wife. They know that a restraining order was put out on you yesterday. They know how to revoke you. They do not know how to keep you out of jail, because that's not what they're trained to do. And the fact that now, under this legislation, you can go back to jail at a cost of $47,000 a year for non-criminal activity where you don't even go before a judge. You just go before the parole board at some point. Because after they've got the retainer on you and you're sitting there, you never see a judge again. And the fact is, we pay for this as taxpayers. And we already know, research shows us that parole, the incidences of recidivism on parole is higher than people who are not on parole. That's why guys wrap up. Not that they want to do more time. They want to get on with their life, and they don't want somebody who has the ability and the authority to yank them back into the system, lose their job, disrupt their family life over something that's non-criminal. That's why guys wrap up, right? They wrap it. They say, hey, I want to finish it. I want to be left alone to get on with my life. This legislation changes that. And what's crazy is it changes it for everybody exiting the system. From 9 months to 2 years. And we don't even want to talk about the recent, hey, we've got the former Speaker of the House who's in Worcester, right? And he's talking about probation, and we don't even talk about where the jobs go when they expand parole, because you're not going to get the jobs. We know where the jobs are going to go. So that's another story altogether. So we have to find a way, because this legislation was on a real fast track. I don't know if we can derail it at this point. I believe personally that a bill will come out of the conference committee. But imagine the administration says this is a cost-neutral bill and it might cost $400,000, and we have people like Tatum's group at Prisons Legal Services that said it could cost anywhere from, what, 125 to 175 million? 75 to 125. So let's take the low number. The state, the elected officials say 400,000. Tatum's people say 75 million. That's a big, big disparity. You know, that's not saying that we're talking about apples and oranges here. That's just, I mean, there's something wrong when you go from 400,000 to 75 million. There's something wrong. So what we're saying, the only thing we're asking for is, one, we're not talking about being soft on crime. Listen, I can be as hard on crime as anyone. We're just talking about being smart on crime and using evidence. And we're asking people to not change we're not asking you to change your opinion. What we're asking you to do is slow down and allow people like Prisons Legal Services and the Criminal Justice Policy Coalition and EPOCA, let us do the research that we can put before you. Research that we can say, we didn't make these numbers up. They came from these studies. Some of them will come from places like the Pew Report on the States and the Department of Justice and I mean, there are national organizations that have done research, and we've got now 18 years worth of three strikes. And how dare our legislators say we're going to craft a bill and not look at 18 years of study? Not where people are guessing, but we can go in and look at their books and say, what did it cost? How many people went to jail? Who were they? So the research is there, and they crafted this bill, and they don't want to use the research. Because they had an agenda. You know, you don't need research when you know when you know what you want the result to be. What do you need research for? Because all research does is it sidetracks you and maybe pushes you away from your agenda. So what you had was a bill that people were trying to rush through and get signed before the holidays. They wanted to have this done before Christmas. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to have it done before Christmas, and all of a sudden you've got these people who are sidetracking their bill. And we're saying to people like, you know, Representative O'Day and people in the Senate, we're saying just give us a chance to present you with a different opinion. And then if you still feel the same way, then vote your conscience. We're not asking you to change the vote. But at the same time that we have people like the McGuires and the Gosels in the chamber arguing from one side. You know, we have people like retired federal judge Nancy Gertner, who's testifying against three strikes, and former DOC Correction Commissioner Kathleen Dennehy, who's testifying with us, and people like Charles Ogletree at Harvard Law and the Houston Institute on Race and Justice. Let us bring them before you, and let you hear another side of the argument, and then take your vote. Because at the end of the day, as the Globe said, what's the hurry? Crime's not going anywhere. The ex-offender's not going anywhere. You know, we're not going to run out of, you know, these issues or the people that it really impacts. So all we're saying is slow down. Let us get the research. Let us give it to you. Let us give you the sources. And then, after you have all of that information, including costs and racial disparities, and then after you have all of that information, take your vote. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming tonight and listening to us. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jamie Damiano Ayers, and I'm one of those rapper-uppers and the three strikers. And but I wasn't born that way. You know, situations happen in life. I come from, I guess, what you'd call a normal family, but I'm really not sure what normal is. You know, everybody has their issues. And my mother certainly did not raise me to become an addict or a criminal. That wasn't what I dreamed of when I was a little girl. You know, I went to Campfire Girls, I was a dancer, a ballet dancer, and I went to school every day. So I can assure you it was not my wish to end up with this lot in life. Going back a few years, well, a lot of years, if you go back to like the 1980s, I married young, right out of high school, and during that time, that's what you did. You either got married or you went to college. I got married. I didn't know I was entering into a very violent relationship. I subsequently had children, and I was in a, became a victim of domestic violence, but I'm so proud today to tell you I am a survivor of domestic violence. My husband was an addict, and he was always the provider of the drugs. So I never had to worry about going out and committing crimes or anything like that. But eventually he went to prison. So by that time I was addicted. Somebody had to go out and get the money. I did. And I committed felonies. And I have 3 strikes against me already. Right? I am asking that people take a look at your life and make sure that this bill is narrowed down so it doesn't affect people like me. It only affects the most atrocious and horrendous criminals and offenders. I just want to speak a little bit about, how I was able to change my ways. I ended up going to treatment. My mother came into the house one day with my sister, and she said, "Jamie, we're taking the kids. Do something with your life, or don't. You have a choice." Well, I chose my children. So I went into treatment. And when I come back, I got my children back. I went to school. I had open cases. I had turned myself in. I got the best probation officer in the world there was, Bill Maddy, the chief probation officer. He sent me to Mass Rehab, where I met Mr. Richard Gates, who became my Mass Rehab counselor, who continuously sends me to school. So I would say, can I go back, can I go back? But anyways, the point of my story is, had I been, let me back up first. I raised 5 children. 2 of my sons are combat veterans, serving both in Iraq as well as Afghanistan. I have a stepdaughter who is a nurse. She's an LPN, a graduate of Singham College, though I raised since she was 12 years old. And I have a daughter at the University of Southern Florida and one daughter at Quincy. Both of them want to become your children's teachers, future teachers of our country, of our great state of Massachusetts. Had this bill been in effect 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever, none of this would have happened. I myself have received an associate's degree in business administration. I will be graduating in June with an associate's in arts and human services, and have already been accepted to the KDAC. Okay, I've owned 2 businesses. Had this bill been in effect at that time, none of these things would have been possible. My children would have been swept away and put into foster care. Now, I don't know about you, but hearing about the CHINS, I was there to advocate for my children. I was there to go to those schools and fight for their rights, and please don't suspend them and kick them out, and getting the phone calls that there's another argument at recess or something. But I was there, and I kept my kids busy. Because I was not in prison, I was able to be that cab driver and drive those kids everywhere they needed to go and show up at every dance recital and every football game. This bill would have taken all that away from my family. It's hard enough having a record, but it would have been so much worse putting 5 innocent lives into somebody else's hands to raise that you don't know who they are. And you don't know what, the effects that it would have on the children. I'm so proud of my children today. They're great, and I've always been honest with them and told them the importance of how important it is to have a clean quarry. It's the most important thing. When I was a kid, I remember my mother always saying, "Your credit, your credit, your credit." Well, we didn't do that. Times are changing. Times are changing. When I get arrested in those days, we were got a public defender. They said, "Plead guilty, we'll get you out of here in 10 minutes. We pleaded guilty, we're out of there in 10 minutes. We didn't know that computers would come along 15 years later with the press of a button, our lives would be ruined. And that we would be looked upon as, stereotyped as some type of pariah. We didn't know those things were going to happen to us. We did what we were told. We were from a different generation. So, in closing, I just want to, ask you to please call the legislators and ask them to amend this bill. So people like myself who want to redeem themselves, and many people here who want to change their life and do the right thing, don't end up in jail for 10 years and lose their children and create 5 other criminals. With that, I'm going to close. Thank you.
Nice, thank you, man. So, we got some homework to do, all right? First of all, I definitely want you to keep in mind Bill 1963. Big thing, you have to call your reps. This is what we have to do, because of course it already went through the Senate, so now we're waiting on the reps to vote on it. So, Worcester, your reps, Representative O'Day, Representative Mahoney, Representative Benenda, Representative Fazolo. The number is 617-722-2000. That's a direct line to the State House. Just ask for your rep, and they'll connect you. All right? I'm pleading with you to please make that phone call, make that change, be the difference. Biggest thing that's going on after this would be the mass mobilization to the State House on March 15th. We want all hands to please be available for that. March 15th, we're going to do a massive mobilization to the State House, once again to address the 3 strikes bill, and also CHINS. It's very important for us to represent that issue also. I just want to, how should I say, at this time, extend any questions that you might have for this panel. I would appreciate it. I saw one hand up there in the back first, so please.
Hi, I'm Bob Flanagan. What I'm having a hard time with, what I'm trying to figure out is we all have due process to law. Now, if somebody has a couple strikes on them, 30 years later, they commit another crime, and that's going to be their 3rd strike, but it's an entirely different crime.
Doesn't make a difference.
But isn't that essentially taking away a person's rights? I mean,
Yeah.
we all have the right to be heard by a jury of our peers. It seems something seems whack to me about that.
Right, well, it's somewhat debatable given the language of the statute. In the actual language of the bill, they do say that anyone pleading guilty to any of those listed offenses for subsection B, the serious violent habitual offenders section, must be informed by the court of the possible penalties for violating those crimes in relation to the 3 strikes provisions at the time of your plea. So in that way, from what we've been told by legislators, that's how they believe that, you know, they'll be setting you straight before you commit those additional strikes. Failing to appreciate the fact that when most people, you know, take a plea, for instance, someone takes a plea to time served just to get out of jail, they're not really thinking about committing another crime. Most people